Hey guys, sorry this video came out a little bit late. Anyways, this video covers the history of Ireland, from the first humans on the island to modern day. All the time periods are marked down below if you want to jump around and select what you want, and as always, all of my sources are down below as well in the description. While the earliest human settlements have been found on Ireland since possibly as far back as 10,500 BC, the earliest 100% confirmed settlements are from Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who arrived around sometime around 7,900 BC. The inhabitants of Ireland remained hunter-gatherers until about 4,000 BC, which is when the appearance of agriculture, polished stone tools, pottery, megalithic tombs, and the domestication of sheep and cattle showed up. The Bronze Age arrived in Ireland in about 2000 BC, with the production of bronze tools, weapons, and elaborate trinkets. This went on until the start of the Iron Age in Ireland in about 600 BC. This brings us to the migration of the Celts from Central Europe, sometime from around 500 to 300 BC. The island is named from the Celts, who called the island Eri after their goddess Eru, which is the origin of the name Ireland. The blending of the new Celtic culture with the previous inhabitants resulted in the emergence of Gaelic culture by around the 500s BC. At the same time, the emergence of the 5 prime Gaelic overkingdoms were forming, and within these kingdoms a rich culture started to flourish. The society of these kingdoms was dominated by an upper class consisting of aristocratic warriors and druids. A druid was a member of the aristocracy who is responsible for being religious leaders, judges, doctors, and political advisors. And since Ireland had no written word yet, druids and bards were also responsible for the keepings of oral traditions. These traditions included that of memorizing their history and mythology. And while we can use archaeological evidence to confirm some history, the same can't be said about their mythology, which wasn't codified and written down until centuries after. And most of the information that we have on Irish mythology that was eventually written down came from Christian scholars, who had a bit of a problem with the whole multiple gods thing, and decided best to tweak the stories more to their liking. Which brings us to our next chapter, which at least has written sources, so thank God. The arrival of Christianity in Ireland. While there currently is no evidence that the Romans ever made any attempts to conquer the island, Roman artifacts such as coins have been found on the island, proving that there was some trade between the kingdoms, on the island and the Roman Empire. And while you might have thought that the Romans might have made raids on the island, it was quite the opposite. In actuality, Irish pirates were known for striking all over the western coast of Britain. This is actually thought to be where the Irish had their first introduction to Christianity, under mercenaries, merchants, and slaves taken from Britain and Gaul. One of these slaves was the incredibly notable St. Patrick, who was taken by Irish pirates from his home in Britain to Ireland, where he was a slave for 6 years before escaping and heading home, where he later became a cleric, and sometime between 432 to 461 AD, he returned to northern and western Ireland to convert the populace to Catholicism. Also, St. Patrick never drove any snakes out of Ireland, because no snakes have ever lived in Ireland. Snakes are just, polite word for the people who are still practicing their native pagan beliefs. St. Patrick is also credited for introducing the Latin alphabet, which enabled Irish monks to preserve and codify parts of their extensive oral history. And while it's still up for debate if St. Patrick himself actually did this, it is clear that someone around this time introduced the Latin alphabet to Ireland. And while the Roman Empire and all of Europe was falling apart and destroying itself, Irish monks were studying Latin and creating new schools of learning due to their isolation, which helped preserve Latin learning during the early Middle Ages. Due to this, an Irish Golden Age started with illuminated manuscripts, metalworking, and sculpture, all flourishing and producing such treasures as the Book of Kells and the Ardagh Chalice. The Irish preservation of knowledge and manuscripts actually helped to kickstart the Carolinian Renaissance of the late 8th century. Now, during this time, most of the Irish kingdoms were just groups of farmland under the authority of kings, without any major cities until the early 800s, when Vikings from Norway came and established the first major cities in Ireland, like Dublin, Cork, and Wexford. The Vikings mostly just stayed to their cities and looted monasteries, but they never had control over large parts of the island. The Vikings maintained partial control of the island until the arrival of another descendant of Scandinavia arrived, the English-French Normans in 1169. The Normans themselves have a complex history, coming from Scandinavia, to controlling part of France and then conquering England under William the Conqueror, and creating the current complex as hell royal lineage. And by 1175, major swaths of land were under Norman control, who then transferred their controlled parts of the island to the Norman King of England, King Henry II, which marked the beginning of 800 years of direct English control. By the late 13th century, the English control on Ireland was weakening, and the introduction of the Black Death, which hit English-controlled cities the hardest, allowed the native rulers of Ireland to take back the majority of the island, minus a small fortified section around Dublin that was called the Pale. This led to a resurgence in Gaelic culture that lasted until 1536. When King Henry VIII of England decided to reconquer Ireland and to put it under the authority of the English crown. After King Henry VIII put down the Kildare Rebellion, Henry attempted to bring all of Ireland under direct English control, so the island would not become a base for future rebellions or foreign invasions of England. Henry VIII was proclaimed King of Ireland at a meeting of the Irish Parliament that year. This didn't actually end up changing much and was simply a change in title, but it set the tone for the slow expansion of English control over the island, until in 1604, when under the reign of James I, or James IV if you're Scottish, who was the first King of Scotland and England for the first time, put Ireland entirely under English control. However, with England being Protestant and Ireland being Catholic, rebellions became frequent, and penal laws were put on the Catholics of Ireland in order to force conversions on the populace. And in 1607, King James I heavily expanded the plantation system, which took land from the Gaelic natives and distributed it to Scottish and English settlers in an attempt to convert the population. The plantations were most effective in the northern region of Ulster, converting and replacing the population with Protestants. The oppression of Irish Catholics only got more extreme under the rule of the English Commonwealth and Oliver Cromwell, making the 1600s one of the most bloody centuries in Irish history, with Cromwell's reconquest of Ireland killing or exiling anywhere from 15 to 83% of Ireland's pre-war population. And after Cromwell's death, de facto power was handed over to the 5% of the country who were Anglican. The economic situation in Ireland deteriorated further in the 18th century, until two cold winters led to a famine from 1740 to 1741. No, not that famine. We'll get to that in a minute. But this one ended up killing 400,000 people, or 16% of Ireland's population, which caused 150,000 people to leave the island. And all I can say is, Jesus Christ, Ireland had it rough for the past century, and it's only gonna get worse. Following a bloody rebellion by the Presbyterian population in Ireland in 1798, inspired by the French and American revolutions, the Irish and the British parliaments enacted the Acts of Union. This union created a new state, merging Great Britain with Ireland, creating the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, established January 1st of 1801. Part of the agreement was that the Catholics and Presbyterians would stop being discriminated under the law, with the removal of the Test Act. But King George III prevented this from happening, invoking the Act of Settlement of 1701. In 1829, Parliament finally allowed Catholic members, but they raised the qualification for each person to vote to £10, effectively stopping the in general poor Catholics from having suffrage. And from 1845 to 1849, Ireland suffered one of its worst disasters in its history, the Great Irish Famine, which was caused by a mold growing on giant portions of potato crops, rendering them inedible. Now, while this also affected the rest of the world, it hit Ireland much worse than the other nations, due to its citizens' reliance on potatoes. The potato famine is a topic worthy of its own video, but basically due to most of the farmland being owned by the English, who wanted to grow only cash crops instead of food for the actual populace. Just like in India, the Irish are forced to plant potatoes due to their great nutritional value and being easy to plant. This caused a reliance on potatoes, added with an English reluctance to send humanitarian aid, and the English actually forcing the Irish to continue exporting food that could have been used to relieve some of the stress of the famine, led to mass death and exodus in Ireland, with the population going from 8 million people pre-famine to 4.4 million after. Ireland to this day still hasn't returned to its pre-famine population. That's both Northern Ireland and Ireland combined. This famine is the reason why massive Irish populations randomly show up in New York and Boston seemingly out of nowhere in the 1840s. The obvious failures of the British government and their clear preference towards Protestants, who are affected less by the famine than their Catholic counterparts, led to a massive increase in the sentiment for home rule in the majority of the country minus the region of Ulster, which was originally the most successfully colonized plantations by the English and Scots. This led to the current division that we still see today between the Ulster Loyalists, or Northern Irish, and Irish Nationalists. The eventual promise of home rule led to the creation of the Ulster Volunteers, and in response, the Irish Volunteers were created. Home Rule of Ireland was passed in 1914 by the British Parliament, and everything seemed to be going somewhat smoothly, until BAM! World War I broke out, and Home Rule was suspended for the duration of the war. In 1916, a failed attempt for Irish independence called the Easter Rising happened in Dublin. Though the rebellion was relatively small, the violence used in its suppression led to a major swing in support of the rebels, when rather famously the 16 leaders of the rebellion were executed. These leaders became martyrs for the cause. This, added with the threat of Irishmen being conscripted to the British Army for World War I in 1918, led to massive support for Sinn Féin, which was the party of the Irish nationalists. Sinn Féin ended up winning 3/4 of all the seats in Ireland during the 1918 elections. The representatives formed their own parliament and claimed sovereignty over the whole Isle. With neither the British or Irish able to come to an agreement, the Irish Republican Army waged a guerrilla war in the Irish War of Independence from 1919 to 1921. And in 1922, a peace treaty created the Irish Free State. The Free State was established as the Dominion of the British Commonwealth, made out of 26 out of the 32 counties of Ireland. Ulster remained with the British, debatably gerrymandering the territory, leading to the current split in religion in the region, with just slightly more Protestants than Catholics. Many people were not fans of this treaty, to say the least, and after a civil war in the Free State over relinquishing Ulster, and later the declaration that the Free State would leave the Commonwealth and form the Republic of Ireland in 1948, tensions between the Northern Irish and Irish were at a boiling point, resulting in the Troubles, which was a series of 30 years of recurring acts of intense violence in which 3,254 people were killed from 1969 to 2003, mostly ending in 1998 though. This also coincided with the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association from 1967 to 1972, which modeled itself on the US Civil Rights Movement, which led a campaign of civil resistance to anti-Catholic discrimination in housing, employment, policing, and electoral procedures. During the Troubles, the Provisional IRA clashed with the Ulster Volunteer Force and English security forces. This caused events like Bloody Sunday in 1972, which was a massacre in Derry, killing 14 and injuring 15, where protests by IRA supporters were killed by the British Army security forces. The IRA infamously used car bombs in both Northern Ireland and England itself, such as during Bloody Friday, later in 1972, which was when 20 bombs exploded in 8 minutes, killing 9 and injuring 130. The whole situation was an utter shit show, and many thought that the Troubles would never end, until a ceasefire was called and peace talks commenced, moderated by US President Bill Clinton, resulting in the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which stated that Northern Ireland would have the right to hold a referendum to see if they wanted to remain part of the UK, become independent, or reunite with the rest of Ireland whenever they wanted to. This agreement has ended most of the hostilities, and peace had finally come to the Emerald Isle. The agreement stated that no walls would divide Ireland and Northern Ireland ever again, which definitely would never happen again. Oh, fuck. Thank you guys so much for staying until the end of the video. I know this video is really late, so sorry about that. I've been trying to focus on classwork more, so I'm sorry if future videos are delayed. Anyways, this video is obviously more of an overview of than an in-depth dive into Irish history. So if you guys enjoyed this video, then please go ahead and like and subscribe. And if you didn't enjoy it, then go ahead and also like and subscribe. Anyways, like always, all of my sources are listed down below in the description. In my next video, I'm planning on doing a collaboration with the channel DO2 on the Norman Conquest. So look out for that in the near future. Anyways, thank you guys so much for staying to the end, and thank you guys for 100 subscribers. If you want to stay updated, you can join my subreddit or follow my Twitter. Anyways, love you guys. Bye!